Pixel King 32 thought he was just another clever gamer hiding behind a Roblox avatar. But in reality, every word he typed was being tracked. Every move he made was being recorded. And by the time he realized the truth, it was already too late. He had been caught in his own trap. The small suburban neighborhood where everything seemed peaceful had no idea that something darker was brewing behind computer screens. Children spent their afternoons logged into Roblox, a game that appeared harmless and creative, a place filled with building blocks, mini-games, and laughter. Parents trusted it, believing their children were safe as long as they were indoors and occupied. But the truth was far more unsettling. A man in his early 30s had discovered this digital playground not as a source of entertainment, but as a hunting ground. He called himself Pixel King 32, an alias that meant nothing to the casual observer but represented danger to those he targeted. He crafted an avatar that looked like a typical teenager, blending into the game's youthful crowd. From the very beginning, his strategy was precise. He never approached too quickly, never revealed too much. He played the long game, taking time to build false friendships, using in-game rewards and promises of rare items to draw kids closer to him. While his online persona looked like any other player, behind the mask was a man who knew how to manipulate. His tone was friendly but measured, his compliments carefully designed to make children trust him. He avoided triggering suspicion by never pushing too hard at once. Instead, he patiently chipped away at boundaries, guiding conversations toward more personal territory. Parents often passed by their children's screens without noticing anything unusual. Bright, blocky graphics distracted from the reality of what was happening in chat windows. For the predator, this invisibility was his greatest weapon. Over time, Pixel King 32 became a fixture in different servers, always present in the most popular games where young players gathered. His reputation among kids grew as someone generous, always offering virtual help or free items. But behind the facade of kindness was something far more dangerous. He was learning names, hobbies, and even where some of the kids lived. It was a slow, methodical collection of information, disguised as casual conversation. Unknown to him, however, he was not entirely invisible. A small team of online volunteers, known among themselves as digital defenders, had been scanning Roblox for suspicious behavior. They were not professionals, but they had seen enough cases to know when something didn't feel right. One member noticed that Pixel King 32 was present in nearly every server where young children played. His patterns were too deliberate, his conversations too rehearsed. They started saving screenshots, recording chat logs, and keeping a close eye on him. At first, they were unsure if he was truly dangerous or just overly social, but the deeper they looked, the clearer the truth became. The man thought he was in complete control, carefully hiding his intentions and leaving no obvious signs for parents or moderators to spot. What he did not realize was that he had already been noticed by people who were willing to follow him step by step, documenting everything he did. His secret life was beginning to unravel, though he had no idea his every move was being watched. The predator believed he had found the perfect cover inside the game, but the first cracks in his disguise had already started to form. The group calling themselves the Digital Defenders operated quietly, never revealing their real names and rarely speaking about what they did outside of their online circle. Each member had their reasons for joining. Some were parents, some were gamers, and others were simply people who had seen the dangers of the internet firsthand. Their mission was not glamorous. Most of their time was spent scrolling through servers, scanning conversations, and looking for patterns that suggested predatory behavior. When they noticed the username Pixel King 32, it was not at first because of anything outrageous he said, but because of how consistent his presence was. He appeared in servers filled with younger players almost every evening, moving from game to game as if he were following a trail of children rather than just playing casually. The defenders began to take notes. They documented when he logged in, which servers he joined, and who he spent the most time talking to. At first glance, the conversations seemed ordinary. He asked about favorite games, school activities, and hobbies. But the deeper they read, the more unsettling the pattern became. He avoided chatting with groups of older players or kids who were surrounded by friends. Instead, he focused on individuals who seemed quiet or isolated, children who responded eagerly to attention. He offered them in-game currency, items, or the promise of help in difficult levels, each gesture making him appear generous and trustworthy. One of the defenders pointed out how his methods followed a classic grooming pattern. He started with harmless questions, then slowly introduced more personal ones, like what city they lived in or whether their parents allowed them to play late at night. To a child, these questions seemed casual, even friendly, but to the vigilant eyes of the defenders, it was evidence that he was fishing for information. They saved every chat log they could find, building a timeline that showed how deliberate his tactics were. The team knew they needed to confirm their suspicions. They decided to create a decoy, a profile that would look like a typical 12-year-old player. The account had a basic avatar, no special items, and a backstory that was believable but entirely fictional. Within just a few days of the decoy account joining servers, Pixel King 32 reached out. The speed of his approach confirmed everything the defenders feared. He treated the decoy exactly as he had treated other children, offering free items, showering the fake profile with compliments, and slowly guiding the conversation into more personal territory. The defenders documented every step. They saved screenshots of his offers, his repeated attempts to isolate the decoy from other players, and his increasingly bold questions. The evidence grew into a disturbing archive of behavior that could not be dismissed as coincidence. They knew now that they were not imagining things. They had stumbled upon a predator who was actively seeking vulnerable children. Even as the defenders continued gathering proof, they began to realize the scale of the risk. If he had already contacted their decoy so quickly, then how many real children had he already spoken to? How many had given him details about their lives without even realizing the danger? The team felt the weight of urgency pressing down on them. They needed to act, but they also understood that one wrong move could alert him and make him vanish. For now, they remained patient, quietly building a case, while the man who thought he was invisible continued walking straight into their trap. The plan to expose the predator had to be carefully designed, because rushing could ruin months of quiet observation. The digital defenders decided the decoy account would become the centerpiece of their operation. It looked like an ordinary child's profile, with a simple avatar dressed in inexpensive clothing, a short bio about liking pizza and dogs, and a play history that suggested hours spent in casual Roblox games. It was the kind of profile that blended seamlessly into the thousands of others online. Pixel King 32 noticed it almost immediately, as if he had been scanning for such accounts all along. His messages arrived quickly, beginning with a friendly hello and an offer to team up in a game. The vigilantes, working behind the screen of the decoy, let the conversations flow naturally. They responded in short, believable sentences, pretending to be a 12-year-old who was excited about free items and new friends. They carefully avoided saying anything that might raise suspicion, but they let him talk as much as possible, ensuring every word was recorded. Soon, Pixel King 32 offered rare in-game currency, something most children would find irresistible. He insisted on private meetings inside the game, choosing quiet corners of popular maps where fewer people would notice his behavior. To him, this was the perfect setup. To the defenders, it was another piece of evidence falling neatly into place. The longer they kept the decoy active, the more emboldened the predator became. His questions shifted from innocent to personal. He asked about where the child lived, what their parents did, and whether they were allowed to stay home alone. He pretended to share his own experiences, inventing a fake backstory about being a young teenager from another state. Each interaction revealed his careful manipulation, designed to make the supposed child feel connected and trusting. But behind the scenes, every word was saved and cataloged into a growing file. The defenders knew that exposing him inside Roblox would not be enough. They needed to connect the username to a real person. To achieve this, they began cross-referencing. They searched gaming forums, checked for identical usernames on social media platforms, and combed through obscure websites where players traded items and discussed strategies. After weeks of digging, they found accounts under the same alias, accounts that contained subtle details pointing toward a real identity. A pattern emerged. Locations mentioned in old posts, usernames that were slightly altered but connected, and an email handle that linked back to a local resident. Piece by piece, the mask began to slip. With every discovery, the predator's false sense of safety crumbled further. He still believed he was luring a child closer to him, while in reality, the walls were closing in. The defenders compiled everything into a single report. Chat logs, screenshots, timestamps, and the breadcrumb trail that led to his offline identity. It was now far beyond a simple suspicion. They were staring at undeniable proof of predatory behavior. The next step was no longer theirs alone to decide. Law enforcement would need to become involved, and the defenders understood that the moment they handed over their file, the predator's life would change forever. The police received the report from the digital defenders and began their own investigation with a level of caution the vigilantes could not match. Detectives assigned to the cybercrime unit understood that online predators often erased evidence quickly once they sensed someone was watching, so they worked quietly, leaving the suspect unaware that his double life was under scrutiny. They reviewed the logs and screenshots, analyzing every message. What stood out most was the calculated way he drew children into deeper conversations. Never rushing, always waiting for the right moment to nudge them toward revealing more. To the detectives, this was not the behavior of someone making innocent mistakes. It was a clear demonstration of grooming, repeated over and over with different victims. Surveillance became the next step. Investigators traced the username to email addresses, then to phone numbers, and finally to a physical residence. What had once been just a faceless avatar in a game was now linked to a man living quietly in a modest apartment complex. From the outside, he looked ordinary. He went to work at irregular jobs, kept to himself, and rarely spoke to neighbors. But behind closed doors, his nights were spent online, deep in conversations he thought were secret. The detectives set up monitoring systems, capturing data as he logged in, tracking his activity in real time. Every movement online was documented, every attempt to reach out to new children carefully recorded. As the days passed, the man grew bolder. He suggested to the decoy account that they should meet in person, disguising it as a casual invitation. He framed it as a chance to hang out like friends. But the language he used revealed his intentions clearly to the trained eyes of law enforcement. The detectives recognized this as the critical turning point. Up until now, everything had been online, but his willingness to take the relationship offline provided the evidence they needed to prove intent. The meeting was arranged in a carefully chosen location, one that was public enough to ensure safety, but controlled enough for law enforcement to manage. The suspect drove there, believing he was on the verge of success. He carried small items with him, tokens meant to impress the child he thought he was meeting. He had no idea that plainclothed officers were already waiting, watching every step he took. They allowed him to linger, to make his presence undeniable before moving in. The arrest happened quickly and without warning. In an instant, the mask of control he had worn for months was torn away. His home was searched that same evening. Laptops, phones, and external drives were seized, each device holding fragments of his secret life. What investigators found confirmed their worst fears. Dozens of chat logs, profiles of other children, and even attempts to lure them outside the game were buried within his devices. The case was no longer about one predator targeting one child. It had become evidence of a wider pattern, a network of attempts and manipulations that could have continued for years if not stopped. For the man who once thought he was untouchable, the realization of how thoroughly he had been trapped came far too late. The news of the arrest spread quickly through the small town, reaching families who had never considered that danger could be lurking inside their children's favorite online game. Parents who once smiled at the sight of their kids playing Roblox now felt an icy fear whenever they thought of how close the predator had come to succeeding. The man behind the username PixelKing32 was no longer just an anonymous figure hidden behind a screen. He was revealed to be an ordinary local resident, someone who had blended into the community without drawing attention. The shock was not only that he had been caught, but that he had lived among them unnoticed for so long. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement uncovered just how far his actions had gone. There were logs of dozens of conversations, each following the same unsettling pattern of manipulation and grooming. Some children had shared personal details. Others had been pressured to continue chatting privately, and a few had narrowly avoided being coaxed into offline meetings. Reading through the evidence painted a disturbing picture of persistence and planning. He had been operating with confidence, certain that his clever wording and false persona made him untouchable. What he never realized was that every step had been quietly documented, first by vigilant strangers, and later by trained detectives. The trial became a public spectacle, with the courtroom filled each day by reporters and worried parents. Prosecutors laid out the evidence methodically, showing the jury how he had approached children, how he gained their trust, and how he eventually pushed for more dangerous interactions. The defense tried to argue that the conversations were exaggerated or misinterpreted, but the sheer volume of proof left little doubt. The jury listened as message after message was read aloud, exposing the careful tactics of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When the verdict was finally delivered, the atmosphere was heavy with both relief and horror. He was found guilty on multiple counts related to child exploitation and online predatory behavior. The sentence was long, ensuring he would spend many years behind bars. Families in the town could finally breathe again, knowing he would not return to their community. Yet the relief was mixed with unease. The case had shown them that the danger was real, that predators could hide behind cartoon avatars and friendly messages, and that no digital space was completely safe. In the aftermath, Roblox implemented stricter safety measures and urged parents to stay more involved in their children's online activities. Community meetings were held to educate families about the importance of monitoring internet use, and the digital defenders received quiet recognition for their role in stopping the predator before he could cause greater harm. For them, it was not a victory to celebrate, but a reminder of why they had started their mission. They knew there were many others like him, waiting in online spaces for the next opportunity. For the man who once called himself PixelKing32, the reality finally set in behind prison walls. He had spent months believing he was invisible, smarter than the children he targeted, and safer than those who tried to catch him. But the illusion had shattered completely. He had been under watch from the very beginning, his words preserved, his movements tracked, his mask peeled away layer by layer until there was nowhere left to hide. The final truth was inescapable. He had never been in control. He had been caught long before he even realized the game was over.